Hello dear viewers, let's level up your turn play in cash games.
Turns the 7 of spades and Tony G has made a straight.
I put 36 in.
Daniel's bet 3,600.
I'm about to share 5 easy tips. Let's jump into it. Tip number 1 is going to be pot controlling on some of those more dynamic turns, making sure that you're not over barreling with your 1 pair hands, even if they are the toppest of pairs or perhaps even an over pair. Sometimes you need to just take it a little easy. Let's take it to Lucid and have a look. Okay, here we are in Lucid. We're going to have ace queen. You're going to get dealt ace queen in the cutoff. Low jack and high are going to get out of the way. Our ace queen is going to raise. The button small are going to fold and the big blind's going to defend. The board is going to come queen 8-5 rainbow, and unsurprisingly, big blind's checking. We're going to bet our ace queen and the big blind's going to call. Now turn is a 9 of diamonds, and this is a little spot where I think a lot of people start protecting the hand unnecessarily with lots of big bets. Let's have the big blind check to us and let's have a look and see what our ace queen is doing in this spot. Here you can see that our ace queen is often betting, none of the time. Ace queen of hearts, for example, never betting here, and ace queen without the diamond, very rarely betting. Let's examine whether this makes sense or whether this doesn't make sense. Now from a theory perspective, we have to be aware that this 9 of diamonds brings a lot of better hands for our opponent. They can have, for example, hands like straights, 6-7, jack 10. They can obviously have a lot of 2 pair, 8-9, 5-9, queen 9. And it's also going to put more pressure on us if we were to make the bet. Given the propensity of better hands that are out there, it makes it harder for us to go as thin with our value when we're looking at just a 1 pair hand, when so many hands can now beat us. Let's have a look. Let's put the 80% bet in and let's have a look and see what our opponent would be doing. So we can see that hands like ace 8, ace 5, our opponent is pure folding now. We can see our opponent is obviously never folding a better hand. That makes sense. So we can see top pair plus, calling 90% of the time with only a little bit of folding from queen 2, queen 3, queen 4, which obviously we have beat, and from hands that we have beat, never folding. When we think about the hands that we have beat and we look at the range here, we can see 68% folds, a little bit of raising, and 28% calling. So is ace queen too thin here? We can see ace queen of hearts never betting here. We see ace queen only betting with a diamond. And if we focus on just our top pair overall, we see that our top pair are only betting 41% of the time. There's a lot of checking with top pair on this kind of board. And it's very easy, I think, for a lot of opponents to go ahead and bet them, fearing that they'll get outdrawn or looking for protection when perhaps it doesn't make strategic sense or theoretical sense to do so. Let's delve a little into why theory actually checks on top pair here. So when we think about our top pair and we think about making the bet, we have to obviously, as a value bet, be getting called lots by worse. When we focus on the hands that are worse than ours, second pair, third pairs, low pairs, etc., we see these are actually folding at quite a high propensity. Ace 8, ace 5 are pure folds, and the hands that are calling are often going to be hands which have extra outs. A hand like jack 9 or 10 9 has a straight draw to go with it, thereby offering a bit more equity for our opponents to make that call, whilst the hands that have very little equity against ace queen are actually just pure folding here, hands like ace 8 or ace 5. If we were to instead check our ace queen, and let's have a blank river roll off, maybe a little ambitious, but let's have a look. If there's 2 of clubs rolls off, and we think about how we're going to get value from the ace 5 or ace 8, we check and we were to bet the river, which we would always be betting the river in this case, you can see that now ace 8 never really folding, ace 5 sometimes folding, sometimes calling, ace 8 suited never really folding. And so we have a much easier way to get value from some of these hands when we don't bet the turn on certain runouts. Now, obviously, not every runout is going to be great for us. It can come, of course, a scary runout, but on the scary runouts, not necessarily a bad thing. If the runout's the jack of diamonds, for example, a pretty terrifying runout, of course, and our opponent makes a big bet here, well, now we perhaps are able to sometimes mix frequency of calling. You can make your decision based on opponents. Given our opponent can have straights and sets and 2 pairs on this kind of board at quite a high frequency with almost 14% of the range, now being better than our ace queen, we need to be a little bit cautious about just going ahead and betting with ace queen. Another thing to consider, how many rivers are going to be a comfortable value bet for us? So if we were to bet and we face a call, are we going to be able to get value on a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, a jack, or a diamond? That's an awful lot of rivers where we may be struggling to get value from, and therefore, given that hand is a bit of a vulnerability in terms of sometimes getting bluff raised, for example, if we were to bet and we were to face a raise on this turn, let's put the raise in from the big blind, we would in fact never be calling our ace queen, never continuing at all, and if we looked at the EV, it would be a massive EV mistake to continue with anything but the ace queen of diamonds. Given that we, if you like, risk a raise here, it often makes sense on some of these dynamic boards to be a little bit more cautious. For example, if we had aces and we would bet the turn here, we'd be pure folding. So in game, from a theory perspective, but perhaps also from a strategic perspective, it makes sense on some of these dynamic turns to slow down a little bit and maybe look for the safe rivers before going for your value bet. Turn play tip number 2, make sure you consider the check raise. In this case, we're going to have the cutoff again, open, but this time we're going to be in the big blind. We're going to have, let's say, a hand like pocket tens. We're going to 3-bet sometimes, and we're choosing this time to 3-bet. The cutoff's going to call, and the board's going to come king, 10, 7. We're going to c-bet this. So far, I think everyone's playing relatively similar. Not everyone's 3-betting, but if you have 3-bet, typically going to range c-bet, and we're going to call. This may be, dear viewers, a difference in how you play when we pick this ace of spades turn and we have a look at the barreling strategy. You can see we're betting just 15% of the time on this ace of spades turn. Somewhat surprising given we've 3-bet and we've c-bet the flop, but it just goes to show you have to be incredibly range aware on some of these turns which are maybe perceived to be good cards for a range, but in fact may not be. When we think about our 10s isn't always betting. Our 10s is in fact mainly checking with the 10 of diamonds, 10 of clubs, and betting a bit more frequency when we hold a spade. Our sets overall are checking 85% of the time, and so it's a good consideration to sometimes think about that option. Look at our aces, never betting. Look at our kings, very rarely betting. Look at our 10s, betting sometimes, mainly with characteristics of hands that we are happy with having a spade here. But I think a lot of us initially would go ahead and just bet these sort of read lists, and that's something we want to explore. Does it make sense to? So let's have a look and see if we check. Our opponent is supposed to play also quite passively in this spot. They're supposed to check hands like ace king. They're supposed to check like hands like ace queen. They're supposed to check hands like ace jack suited. Now you will know your players hopefully better than I will, but I would speculate that a lot of people are not checking a hand like ace queen or ace king when they're in the cutoff after them in 3-bet and then bet check to. I think they're pretty happy to start building a pot of that situation. I'd also suggest that a lot of people could be perhaps more inclined to bluff a hand like 6-5 of diamonds, which is pure check-in for mystical reasons that are unknown to me, and are perhaps more inclined to bet some of their draws, perhaps 9-8 and jack-9, for fear of like, well, maybe I can make the guy fold by the river. If we face a bet, and let's have a look and see what our 10s is doing. Our 10s is only ever check raising in theory. Let's have a look and see the response if we do check raise this hand, pocket 10s, and we see our opponent is supposed to bet fold hands like ace queen. Again, be the judge in your own games whether you think that's true or not, but I would say most people in the cutoff here, if they've bet ace queen on this turn, are unlikely to fold it to a check jam when the bulk of their chips are already in the middle. If that's the case, and we think they're going to bet more frequently with ace king and ace queen, you're better served checking this turn, in addition to perhaps picking up more bluffs than the equilibrium play would. It's very important to make sure that you consider, when you're out of position, all of your actions. Don't just go ahead and sort of blindly blast with good hands because you have a good hand and you're trying to get paid. Make sure you consider all your options, whether you can perhaps check raise those hands more effectively based on your opponent's tendencies and based on the theoretical tendencies. Okay, tip number 3, which is one of my favorites. Don't over bluff delay the turns that are perceived to hit your range hard. So let's have a look in Lucid and talk about what I mean, because I think this is quite a fun one. Again, we're going to pick cutoff versus big blind. These are all going to be cutoff versus big blind spots. Don't worry too much about why. We're going to pick a 10 of hearts, 6 of diamonds, 3 of hearts. Big blind's going to check, and we're going to check back as we should be doing about half the time here. Now the turn is going to be the ace of spades. Again, picking this ace of spades. Pretty scary board, and we can see quite a few interesting factors already from the big blind. The big blind is supposed to be probing here with an over pot bet sizing 100% of the time when they've got 10-6, 100% of the time when they've got 6-3, a lot of the time when they've got ace-10, a lot of the time when they've got ace-6. Now, once again, I'd encourage you to think about the folks that you play with in your home game and ask yourself, or maybe yourself, if you were in this situation and you've defended 10-6 of clubs in the big blind and the board's come 10-6-3, you're feeling pretty happy about you flop top 2 and it goes check. The turn's the ace. Are you ever checking there? I would say most of us are checking quite frequently. It's an ace. It's like, maybe my opponent's going to bluff. Maybe they're going to rep it. If they got an ace anyway, they're going to bet. Why would I bet this spot? Especially why would I go over bet and just get a fold from jack 9 or something? It would be like pretty sad. So I think most people out there, most of the population, including both regs and recreationals, are checking some more of these strong hands on this ace of spades turn. Now, let's have a look and see what happens when they do check in terms of theory. You can see that we're supposed to be mixing quite a lot. But when we think about our nothing is supposed to be checking a lot here too. Now, a lot of people go ahead and bet their nothing on this turn. They think, well, it's an ace. I can represent the ace. My opponent's going to fold. Brilliant. Now, we've already talked about why the big blind might have a stronger range here with some of their ace queen, ace 10, 10-6. But let's also now explore what happens when we do make the bet. So let's bet 80%. It was a pretty nice sizing with our bluff, with our 9-7 of clubs. Our opponent is supposed to fold hands like king 10, queen 10, jack 10. Hands like queen jack, and king queen. Now, again, I'd encourage you guys to think, would you be folding king 10 off to a 1 bet on the turn here? I would suspect most of us wouldn't be. And I would expect most of your population, most of the opponents you play, wouldn't be folding those hands. If they're not folding those hands, that's a bad thing in terms of the EV of our bluffing. Our betting success rate in terms of getting folds is going to go down. When we combine the factor that maybe they're calling a little bit more with their second pair, maybe, for example, they're calling a bit more the third pair too. I mean, king 6, etc., etc. Some people certainly would call those. And then also when you think about the fact there's more two pair available to them because, of course, we think they've got 10-6 a bit more. We think they've got 6-3 a bit more. And there's more top pair available to them because they're not probing so much ace-queen, not probing so much ace-10 in terms of the two pair. All of these factors combine to make bluffing on this ace of spades a worse thing to do compared to equilibrium poker. And we shouldn't be doing it very frequently in equilibrium poker anyway. Now, if we were to check here, let's go check, check. One of the nice things about this is you can still represent the air on the river. In fact, it's actually quite an easy, like on this scary turn, it's quite nice to be able to check back this turn because a lot of opponents will assume that you would bluff that turn if you had an air hand. And so therefore they typically will range you to a hand that isn't air. Maybe they'll put you on 7s or 8s or 9s or 6x or something like that. And if it goes check, check, and let's say a blank 2 comes on the river, we can always choose to bet the river instead if it's checked to us. Opponents often on this river are going to once again be betting their second pair plus, let's say. And so often when they check for the third time from the big blind, they're going to be left with something along this line. They may choose to bluff sometimes, but often a lot of people don't love bluffing this spot because it just feels like a spot they're going to get called a lot. So when they check, you actually have a very easy bet with your nothing, which you would now take on the river at a pure 100% frequency. So make sure when the turn's scary for your opponent's range and perceived a good card for your range, you're a little bit careful, in fact, about taking all of your air as a delay bet. Turn play tip number 4 is going to be the opposite. Over delaying with your air on turn cards that are perceived to not hit your range very hard. So we're going to do exactly the same flop, but instead we're going to take the ace of spades and turn it into the 2 of spades. Now let's have a look at our opponent. So our opponent is supposed to be betting a decent amount here, and they're supposed to be also checking a decent amount of top pair plus. When we look at their betting frequency, they're supposed to be betting lots of nothing here, lots of no equity hands, queen jack for example, betting at a very decent frequency. A hand like king jack and king queen, betting at a very high frequency. Maybe some opponents will miss some of those, possible. A7, pretty unusual bet from a lot of opponents to see here. It's betting at a decent frequency. So we can take away some of the perhaps air bluffing as an average tendency from opponents, but then also they're supposed to be checking an awful lot of top pair plus and even second pair plus. If you were in the big blind here, you've defended, let's say with a hand even like king 6 of clubs. The flop's gone check, check here on this 10-6-3 against your cut-off opponent. A lot of people are tempted to bet that hand. Let's get some protection, let's get some value, let's deny some equity. I'm going to call a bet anyway, so I may as well bet, etc., etc. And a lot of opponents are often willing to bet those hands. If that's the case, and that's a big caveat, but it's often the case, but if that's the case, let's have a look at how that would impact their range. Let's assume that they play the rest of their range perfect equilibrium frequency. And let's say we were to bet 80% here. So let's focus on their third pair and below. If this is what their range is left with, they're calling something like, or they're V-pipping something like just 27% of their range. 73% of their hands are likely folding if they're betting their two pair, if they're probing their two pair plus on this turn. Opponents differ, of course, but most of the time when you look at any population data, they are pretty happy to probe with value hands, and they're pretty unhappy to check value hands on turns on dynamic boards, even more so if it's boards that are perceived not to help your range too much. So a lot of these things I'm adding some extra, let's say, population tendencies on top, but even just getting to a level where perhaps you're playing a more equilibrium style strategy here, making sure that you're not just willingly checking down with a lot of your air hands here. For example, a hand like king 9 off, a lot of us would just be in check down mode or jack 9 off or queen jack off, but these make probably far better bets on the turn here compared to checking on this kind of turn, and they made far worse bets when it was a scary turn card. Making sure you're not missing these spots is a great thing to add a big amount of win rates in a pretty easy to accumulate situation on those turns in those cash games. Tip number 5, make sure you're not missing those no equity probing spots. Final spot, we'll do another cut-off raise. We're going to be in the big blinds and we're going to defend. The board is going to come 8, 5, 3. We're going to have queen jack here, by the way. We're going to check, and our opponent is happily going to check. The turn's going to be a 2, and you can see that queen jack is supposed to be probing about half the time here, with the spades especially. I'm going to make an argument that I think this is a better than average probe to be making against the bulk of the population you'll be playing in these cash games. So let's take it to the flop to start with. On the flop, let's have a look at our opponent's c-betting strategy. They are supposed to be checking an awful lot of top pair plus. They're supposed to be checking aces most of the time on this kind of flop. They're supposed to be checking hands like 10-8 of clubs most of the time. Again, if you're in the shoes, dear viewer, or if your opponents in your home game are in these shoes, do you think they're checking on this board hands like jacks, queens, kings, aces, 10-8, etc., etc.? I would argue that most opponents don't check those hands on this kind of board, and a lot of opponents actually go ahead and even bet hands like ace-5 here at a very high frequency, and even 6s and 7s. Very tempting to just bet them. Get some protection, win the hand, happy days. Are they betting as many bluffs? Who knows? Tough to say, but a lot of opponents might not bet so much ace-9 here, for example, or they might not bet so much king-jack. Now on this turn, let's see what happens if we were to bet. Let's put the 70% bet in. Means our opponents are supposed to call king-queen, king jack here at a decent-ish, maybe not a huge frequency, but some frequency. They're supposed to have, of course, all of those top pairs in their range, which we already talked about, may not be there so much. If we focus in on their under pairs and second pairs and below, again, we'd be getting overfolds relative to the price that we need. Risking 3.5 to win 5 and getting 46% folds is fantastic from a maths perspective, and something to think about in terms of whether you're going to over-realize in this situation, again, given because of their range. One final thing to mention, if we were to use the small bet, we're going to see an awful lot of raising here. And this is an in particular area where it's really difficult. You bet 1.5 in this turn. It's pretty tricky when we focus in on some of these hands for opponents to find the raise here. Have you ever, when faced a small bet, gone ahead and raised a hand like 10-9? It should be done pretty frequently. Have you seen other opponents do it? Have you thought about doing it? I would argue that the majority of people would not find the Jack-9 or the 10-9 raise. It's pretty counterintuitive. They would not find the King-10 raise. They would not find the King-Jack raise. They would not find the Ace-9 raise. This is a pretty tricky strategy to implement, and especially when you combine it, once again, the turn strategies with perhaps their flop tendencies, this can be an excellent spot to attack with some no equity. One other final thing to mention, no equity isn't necessarily even no equity. So we look at our Queen-Jack and we think, it's a no equity. It's not got any connection to the board. It's still got 2 overs, right? Let's say our opponent did play theoretically correctly on the flop and check their 10 of clubs here. Let's think about a queen jack. Now, a lot of us are very, very willing to go ahead and probe our 9-7 here. It's a gut shot. It's got an over. Happy days. Let's think about a 9-7. So our 9-7 against that 10-8 has 3 9s and 4 6s that it can hit to have the best hand on the river. 7 outs. Queen jack, 6 outs. Pretty close. The other thing to mention though, when you probe 9-7 and the river comes a 6, is your opponent willing to call a bet that big with their 10-8? I would argue probably not. It's not exactly a thrilling spot if you're the cutoff and you've been probed into and you've checked the top pair on the flop because you're theoretically sound and have a savvy, lucid strategy, and your opponent's probed into you and you call, and then the river's a 6 and you think, well, that's not great, and they bet big and you think, I guess I'm folding now. Whereas if the turn is a queen or a jack, a lot of people get very stubborn in those spots with their top pair or flop top pair, or even their second pair. If they have, if you've checked the hand like king 5 and you face a probe, you call, and then the river's a queen or a jack and you're in the cutoff and you face another big probe, there's a lot of stuff that's missed. There's a lot of air. So it can be good to probe these hands, not only because A, they have quite a lot of outs anyway, relative to a lot of our opponent's corner range, but B, when you improve, often it's quite a disguised hand and you can over-realize relative to theoretical strategy. But you can see, once again, just playing theoretically correct is going to enable you to pick up some of these pots. That's a big thing that separates, I think, some of the best poker players from some of the, let's say, up-and-coming poker players, is their ability to not let spots go by. Having an active mindset, even in some of these small pots, even when you haven't got necessarily a hand that's perceived to be that connected, making sure that we aren't just passively passing up on lots of profitable opportunities is something that can be incredibly useful for improving your win rates, especially when it comes to the turn, especially when it comes to those cash games. So those were 5 tips to help you build stacks in those cash games. I hope they were helpful. If you liked it, please let us know with a like and subscribe and a no equity comment. I don't know what I'm doing with these promotions. They don't really work. We're going to be back. We're probably going to do a little series on this. So it's going to be some more how to crush some cash games, how to crush some tournaments. Is there anything in particular you would like to see rushed ahead of schedule? Please let us know in the comments and we'll try and work on that. But we're going to try and give you some guidance in all of the streets, in all of the spots, in all of the poker formats that Lucid has to offer. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.